Hi, we're here today with Steve Fetter. Steve is definitely an Arizona drag racing legend. He's been there, done that, has a lot of great experiences and great stories. And if you're like me, we know Steve, but we'd like to know Steve a little bit better and hear some of those stories today. Steve, welcome.
Thank you.
You How long you been in Arizona?
Moved here when I was 15,
Where'd you come from?
Minnesota. I lived on a farm.
So came from the UFTA state to Arizona, right?
Absolutely.
And your parents moved here, or
We moved here for my dad's health. He was a waist gunner in a B-17 in World War II. He froze his hands and feet, and he was a farmer, and they told him at that time, you're either going to move to Florida or Arizona for the health problems, or we won't. They told him they wouldn't help him. So we moved out here when I was 15.
Wow. Well, thank you. I mean, your dad was one of our greatest generation, and certainly we all can remember as youth having parents. What did your dad do in the war? And that was like a waist gunner in a 17. That was really tumultuous, and the fact that he survived it, and we're just very blessed that happened. You're a car guy.
Yep.
So when did you first know you were a car guy?
I'm one of the few people that probably from the time you get in, I graduated in 66, and everybody was into hot rods at that time. And I'm probably one of the few people that kept hot rods in my blood from the time I graduated from high school to this day.
So did you get more into cars when you came to Arizona, or had you started back in Minnesota?
Definitely out here. Nothing in Minnesota.
What caught your interest? What hooked you?
Rundle. Joe Rundle. He used to have a street racing deal, and when he had his speed shop in his dad's grocery store, that's probably what hooked me. That was what got me more interested into it. And when I bought my first 55 and did some modifying to it and did some of the things like that, that's what probably got me more hooked on anything.
So was he a good mentor to you? Did he give you some good direction, or were you kind of on your own?
Joe was an absolute great guy to me. We had our ups and downs like everybody else, but he taught me a tremendous amount. He was always looking for help on the car, and he never paid for help. Okay, and I was really, really enthused in it, and to have somebody that would let you do the things that we did on the car and that, especially when he went from the 55 to the Camaro, and we went national racing that one year, and he won the championship. We learned a tremendous amount. We had probably a maintenance schedule on that car that people would envy to this day. The heads would be taken off and taken to Dean Turk every 6 to 8 passes, and the short block would come out of the car and be serviced or looked at every 10 to 15 passes. And we had 2 motors that we'd switch back and forth between. So we did a lot of maintenance at that time, but it got me to where I learned how to take motors apart and put them back together. And it went from taking them apart all the time because he didn't want to take them apart, and then when you'd do certain things and he'd put the pistons in or do something, and you'd do this or do that. But then it got to where he would let me do everything, and he would only come and do the final valve adjustment. And David Braswell started working on the car, and when Braswell was there, David is unbelievably smart. He knew a tremendous amount about jetting the carburetors, altitude differences, the timing deals. He was the great reason between him and Joe. Joe was able to spend the money to do it, and David with the knowledge to have somebody that would spend the money.
So all great, legends of Arizona drag racing for sure. Braswell basically, especially in the HRA classes where two barrels were
absolutely
very, very much a great class to run, and you can't forget that stuff. What was your first drag race you went to? What's the first time you went to a drag strip?
Beeline.
And how did that happen?
A friend of mine and my dad never took us out there. He was not into the cars that much. We just went out there on our own, probably mid to late 60s. We just went out on a regular deal and enjoyed it. Thought that it was really great. But this was just spectating and watching. And then getting my first 55, had a 283 in it with a 3-speed on the column. Of course, put a big cam in it, went out and ran it. It would run 14s, maybe 95 mile an hour, something like that. But I mean, to then, but it sounded tremendous because of the big cam. Of course, you didn't know the other stuff that had to go with it, compression and gears and all that. You didn't do any of that stuff. But that's when I first got into it.
So you're 55, and so it was a 283,
283,
and it ran in the 14s.
14s.
The 3-speed on the tree.
3-speed on the tree.
That's pretty healthy in those days. That's not too bad. I tried my best in probably a little bit later than that. My first cars were never that quick, so that was a pretty healthy ride. So that got you. You felt the need. You had the need for speed.
You had the need for speed, and then I decided that I never put a 327 or a 350 or anything in that. I decided I wanted to go something fast, so I bought an L88 sharp block, some heads, modified the car, put 538s with a 4-speed on it, and drove it on the street. And it would run mid-12s, 115 mile an hour or so, 100 a little plus. But I drove it every day from Scottsdale Road, McDowell, to 24th Street in the airport, because I worked at a machine shop in the airport. And used to go down Airway way back then. And 538s on the street with smaller street tires was, you'd go through the gears before you went across the intersection.
Yeah, you wouldn't want it. Wasn't a highway vehicle.
Oh, no, it wasn't a highway gear, but it was a tremendous amount of fun.
So you work for a machine shop. It was like a aircraft machine type deal. So, and that was you were mechanically inclined. You loved doing stuff with your hands.
Yeah.
And so you did that. When did you? A lot of people will all remember you were synonymous with working for Rundle and working for John Lober, and that's where you helped a lot of people and influenced a lot of people to go racing, stay racing, and let them have fun. Shared a lot of tribal knowledge with them. How did you transition to work? Was it Rundle you worked for first?
Rundle was the first one I worked for in the speed shop deals. I worked at the machine shop for a while. Then I got a job at Scottsdale Datsun, and I started as a lube man. And within 2 years, I was doing tune-up because it worked out. And that was probably the best job I had at the time, because I was doing tune-up in a deal, and they were just going from the 240Zs to the 260 to the 280 fuel injection Zs, and I worked on some of that stuff. And then Rundle offered me a job working with him, and I worked for Joe for probably 8.5, 9 years.
What year was it you went to work for Joe? Do you remember?
74, 75,
okay.
Someplace in that area, roughly in that area. But when we were working for Joe, he had a speed shop, but we did a lot of four-wheel drive stuff too at that time. And we would go four-wheeling most of the nights, go out in the desert, out in the river bottom, and go four-wheeling a lot. And then we'd go to drag races on the weekends. And that's when Joe got into it was about the time the Camaro was around, and we went racing nationally, and he won the championship that one year. But we went to a lot of races. We went to Baton Rouge, we went to Olathe, Kansas, we went to Tulsa. And when we were at Tulsa, I met T.C. Lemons, which was Garlitz's mechanic. And he had talked us into buying a share of Pro, the Drag Racers Association. And Rundle bought one share of Pro, so we went back and raced the Pro race one year as Pro stock. And I think we qualified 28th or 29th in a 32-car field, but we ran a 970 to get in the field, and Pro stocks were running 950s at the time. We weren't serious, but we were showing support for their class.
And had a good time.
And had a great time.
So,
and it started a very good friendship with TC from that.
So you worked for Joe for 8.5 years. You had a great time. Started meeting a lot of people. Did you ever? Were you ever thinking, what do I want to do when I grow up, or did you know that this was you were doing exactly what you wanted to be doing?
When Rundle was closing, because he had to close because of condemnation for the freeway going through, he didn't own the land. Somebody else owned the land. Him and I talked very seriously about buying him out, and we got serious enough that we had money figures talked and everything else, but it just didn't happen. And when he moved to Payson, I went to work for Wilkie's for 1 year. And while I was working at Wilkie's, John Loper came out one day, was delivering parts. And I came out of the back, and he says, I always wondered where you went, Fetter, because I never knew where you were at. And he left and didn't say nothing. About a week later, he called and wanted to go to lunch. So we went to lunch and we talked. and he asked me why I never opened a speed shop, and I talked about how Rundle and I just about sold out. And one of the things Rundle had that was well worth buying out is he had bought Holley direct, and he had Holley, and all the manufacturers would have went with me if I would have bought the shop at that time. But I told him I didn't think there was a good area to build in at that time. And he said, well, if you were going to build a shop, where would you build one? I said, I'd go minimum Country Club East and a minimum Main South. And he ended up putting a shop out there. And he said, if I build this shop, would you come work for me? And I said, yes, I would.
That's awesome.
And I worked for him for 25 years at the shop, from the day it was built to when I moved.
That transition is interesting. Willie and Wilkie were the Wong family. There was very interesting. They were merchants. They had their speed shop. They also had I think Wilkie, wasn't he mayor of Mesa for? Yeah.
He was mayor of Mesa at that time when I was working for him. He was mayor of Mesa then.
So what was that like? Is it kind of interesting was that distracting for him, you think, or did it?
Willie was good.
Uh-huh.
Okay. He liked the political deal. I think it was more of a retirement deal for him.
Okay.
Because once you're the mayor, you can retire, and you're got retirement with the city. And they knew that the city, he had ideas that the city was going to come down Main Street with a tram deal. He had ideas, or that was in the forecasted future,
yeah.
Inside knowledge. And they hung out just long enough to be able to keep, so when they were bought out, they stayed in business just for that. At one time when I was at Rundle's, down the street from us, we had Super Shops, Service Center, and Wilkie's. There was 4 shops within 2-3 miles on Main that were name shops at that time. And we all stayed busy somewhat. So, I mean, at that time, a brick and mortar store right now has a hard time because of the mail order people. And that was one of the things with John, one of the things he worked with, and the reason we did mail order was to keep our volume up, to keep the discounts with the manufacturers. Mm-hmm. Because they all get different discounts for the amount that you sell.
So, along the way, you saw a lot of people, work with a lot of people, a lot of kids came in, some just did it for a while and left, some did it, and you worked long enough where they bought something from you when they were 21, 22, and all of a sudden you didn't see them until they were like 44 and their families were raised, and they came back and started buying parts again. But you were the guy in the East Valley people want to see. I'm telling you that, I'm not asking you. I know that for a fact. And very great reputation for taking care of people, and it's something you should be proud of. Along the way, when did you get rid of your 55? What happened to that?
My son was going in high school, and I was a little bit down on racing at the time, and I said, are you interested at all in my 55? What are you asking? I says, well, I'm thinking of letting you, if you want to drive it, you can drive it and do this. I'm really not interested in cars, Dad. So I ended up selling it to Bob Panzer, okay? I had a deal going where I was going to sell it to a professional baseball player, and I laughed. It was kind of a funny deal because he thought I was asking too low a price, okay? And Panzer bought it. I think Bob enjoyed the car tremendously from what he had, and he finally sold it a few years ago to a guy, I believe a guy in Idaho or Utah or something. But Sean, about 6 months after I sold the car, the light switch clicked and he went crazy with cars. And he always regretted that he never had the chance to do the car.
Kind of like we hear all the time, the car, I wish I had that car again. Well, that was a car he never had, he wished he had. Yeah.
Yes.
That's awesome. So he's big time into cars now.
Yes.
And the nut didn't fall far from the tree. I mean, everybody goes through their cycles of loving it and kind of backing away from it and going, but I don't think it's ever out of your blood.
No.
You've met a lot of interesting people along the way, and I know that somebody we all loved who was definitely another legend and an Arizona Drag Racing Hall of Fame member. Tell us about Mark Neifer.
Mark and I met at Tulsa. We went back to watch the second Pro Challenge, and I ended up meeting Mark there. He had just come from Bonneville. And we found out we lived about a mile away from each other in Phoenix, And I started going over to his house when he was working on cars in the back of his house in a little garage that he had. And we ended up a very good relationship. I remember him and Gene Rickert had the Rickert and Ivor car. And then he built the Bloodshot car in his house and went working with that quite a bit when he was racing in the mid-70s, and went back to Indy with him twice. One of the years he went back, he went down to the Final Four. And the Final Four were Rickert and Ivor, Settles, Vini, and Armstrong.
Wow.
So, I mean, it was a pretty stout, and it was a 32-car field. This is when they ran Pro Comp, when they ran the funny cars and dragsters together. And I mean, and Settles ended up winning the race, and we were there with him. So we had a lot of fun. And Mark was a tremendous person. The personality he had, he was the friendliest person in the world. He never got mad at anybody that I ever really seen. And he always, if he didn't have anything to say about you good, he didn't say anything. He talked about everybody in a very positive state, and he loved racing.
Yeah, I think there's few people, we've had a few people like Mark in our history in Arizona drag racers that, you know, when we lost him, it was like everybody felt like a punch in the stomach, much like Trip Shoemake. You know, that kind of guy that really was always positive and energetic. Mark was well known for, he worked for Dynamic Machine, and the thing with Dynamic, as story was told to me, is that if you're going to buy a part for your car, they'd rather you use the equipment there and make that part so you learn how to do the machining. And so Mark was really a hands-on, build your own stuff. I mean, he built a lot of major components for everything he raced.
I think he still has the record for the fastest Donovan block ever. He ran low, I think 15, 16, maybe a 14, and way over 270 mile an hour with a early style Hemi. But that's when they were allowed 100% nitro. But I mean, I don't think anybody, even the nostalgia stuff, has ever gone any faster than with a early style block. Even the early top fuelers and anything.
But he didn't. His knowledge of the cylinder heads and all that was.
He made billet cylinder heads
Right.
for his motor back at that time. The only reason he didn't make a block or something like that, it was too easy to buy a Donovan or something like that. But he used a very big bore, short stroke, because he milled the block way down.
He was, quite the guy, and missed by all. You've been to a lot of drag races, a lot of drag strips. Where in Arizona? What drag strips in Arizona do you remember, along with Beeline?
Beeline was probably Phoenix Raceway. Mel Larson's, was they used to call it, was one of the big ones. Perryville was running a little bit at the time. I think they ran some stuff at Phoenix Raceway a little bit for some of the drag race stuff, but that was about it, most of the ones that I went to. But we went all the way to Baton Rouge with Joe, to Olathe, Kansas, St. Louis. What if you did the year he ran the championship? We went to a lot of Denver. We went to a lot of different races in different places. Fremont was one of the races we used to love to go race because of the air.
Yeah.
And he actually went and ran Lions some too. So, I mean, you'd love to go to the coast tracks because of the air. And Braswell was so sharp, and it taught him so much with the air. You could run 1/10 to 2/10 quicker and 5 to 10 mile an hour faster when you went to the good air. So, I mean, it was really fast.
Yeah, both places it was possible to have, actually below sea level air.
Absolutely.
And that was that good. I never had a chance to run Lions, but definitely ran Fremont, and it was like amazing. It's like all of a sudden it's like a big energy pill for your car.
Oh, absolutely.
But everybody's doing the same thing, so you better pick up, right?
Yep.
I remember seeing Mark at that race race a couple times I was there. Who else? I mean, Mark, he definitely had his deal. He drove a top fuel car for John Loper for a while, but his passion was he wanted to drive. He liked his car. He liked being the guy.
Mark liked to engineer the work on his car.
Right.
He liked to do the engineering type stuff. When he went to fuel injection over the blower, and I said, why are you going fuel injection? Because he didn't like him because he called them belly button racers. Everybody in the world had one. But he says he got upset with the blower deal because of the Drazy deal. And when he went the fuel deal, he just loved to do that type of stuff. He had a very good connection. I don't think a lot of people knew that he talked a lot with Warren Johnson. And him and Warren talked a lot about the injection tube links and stuff like this and things like that. But him and Warren had a very good connection.
Yeah, I've been blessed to have been around Warren Johnson a few times when he started talking about stuff, and you really just want to shut up and listen, because he's going to tell you some stuff you never even thought about. And but Mark was that kind of guy. People saw him as the real deal. So someone like Warren Johnson, I could see him right away, liking Mark, because Mark could probably tell him some things too. And then, a good team. Norm Gracie, there's another story about Arizona drag racing, the PSI blower. It came out of so-called nowhere, but it actually, Mark had tested and worked with Norm on that in the development of that. What are your memories of that process?
When Mark was telling me he was running the PSI and trying to work with it, I knew Norm was working with Chauvin Evans at that time, and they were just running the blow and alcohol deal. And Norm was trying to come up with a better blower. And he talked about a bunch of the different deals. He was unbelievably smart. I don't think people realized how really good an engineer he was. I think he graduated first or second in his class at Purdue or something. And I mean, that's unbelievably in engineering. He had a blower dyno, one of the first ones I ever heard of ever. And he ran it with a 455 Oldsmobile with a Turbo 400. And he would spin the blower to a certain speed, knew what all the internals weighed, and he could tell the horsepower what it took to turn the blower by how fast it would de-accelerate. And that was the way he checked it. Well, when he was doing some of the blowers, he couldn't run them fast enough for the speed he wanted to see what horsepower it took. So I had nitrous, and I had played with it when I had my Urs 55 with a 427 in it. And I loaned him a nitrous kit so he could put it on his 455 Oldsmobile to get enough horsepower to spin the blower fast enough to actually see what it was doing for horsepower. And I mean, that's where I got in a very good, close relationship with Norm. And I remember when he brought one of his blowers to the shop when I was on Mesa Drive on Country Club, and he brought it in. John happened to be at the store at the time, and Drazy brings it in, sets it down on the floor, has it in an air research box, and he's showing me all the pieces. And he's showing it to me, he's not showing it to John. And John's looking at this like going, boy, look at all this neat trick stuff. And Drazy's trying to explain to me how it works as a compressor, not as it's not whipping the air to death. And I mean, Drazy was very, very smart, very good person.
Wasn't the concept of that really from industrial compressors, the basic,
it was
the root concept?
It was a small Swedish compressor
Right.
they used for air or Norwegian or something like that, and he picked up the idea from that. And his blower deals, when he made Mark's deal, Mark's had a billet rotor in it. And then when he started building them, he was doing a cast blower, and Jay Payne blew one of the cast ones up because the blower tranny didn't shift right or something, and it went to a huge overdrive speed, and it blew the blower up. And they put a moratorium and held him on a while until they could see why. And he never got to put it in fuel, really, because a couple people worked against it for that reason. And when it blew up that first one, it just sealed the other people's deal. They let them use it in alcohol classes, but they wouldn't let them use it in fuel.
It was definitely, you could definitely tell it on the car. I mean, the thing looked different. I mean, it looked big.
It looked big.
It was big. A great mind, another guy that I wish we could have interviewed. Did a lot of technology. I mean, things for racing.
He came up with the idea with everybody used to have a blower manifold. They had the long open slot in them. Mm-hmm. He came up with a little pie-shaped deal on the front side of the blower. That was his innovation that everybody started using and still uses in fuel. It was his innovation to know where to put the air.
We run that on our alcohol car.
He gave the high helix blower deal away. He was talking to one of the blower guys, and they were saying, well, the best you can do is you do this, you round them off here and do all this, and it's a high helix deal, but that's the best you're going to do with this rotor, the old blower. Right. The old blower. That's the best it's going to do. And Littlefield went out and used it, and started making them. And I mean, he gave it to him.
I have a Littlefield blower on my car, so I know that Dracy had a lot to do with that and that concept. A lot of interesting people that you've come across. What do you want people to know about you? If if what you're not really look at me kind of guy, so don't be embarrassed. But if somebody doesn't know you, what's your favorite non-automotive hobby? What do you do to keep busy?
I played with anything that had wheels.
Okay.
Motorcycles, quads. All of my boys and I all did a tremendous lot of quad riding. I got into the quads pretty heavy. Had a Banshee that was heavily modified, swing arms, shocks, stroker motor, all that stuff. I did circle racing in the mid-'70s with Rick Essley and Jerry McClung. We worked on the motors there, and I got hooked up with Lee Birdsong. He was running a car, and I ended up working with his Ken Sherwood, who was doing his motors and that, who owned the car. And Ken Sherwood asked if I would help him with some motor stuff, and got into building a motor for Birdsong, and it ran really, really good. And that was a tremendous lot. I did a lot of roundy round racing, drag racing, heavy into the NASCAR, watching the NASCAR. Smokey Crossman and I did a lot of watching the NASCAR races, going to the races. Then did a lot of traveling racing with John when we'd go to Indy every year, and we'd go to the World Finals and the Winter Nationals. So I got to see a lot of good races that way and stay involved with the racing, even though I wasn't racing myself, seeing the stuff that was happening and the people that were doing things. So I got to see a lot of innovations over my lifetime.
You mentioned Smokey Crossman, and there's somebody that is near and dear to me as well. But really had people really knew him that were more in the business, the automotive business, because he worked for Loper at one time, then became a sales manufacturing representative for multiple performance companies. But how did you meet Smokey?
We went to high school together.
Wow.
A lot of people didn't know that. We went to high school together in Coronado, and we graduated the same year. So I met him that way. And he was working for John Thorne at Scottsdale Speed, and that's where I bought the first cam for my 283 way back at that time. And John Thorne had a 55 Chevy with a 426 wedge in it, that at that time they didn't know anything about the oiling problems on the bottom end, and every time you'd run them up very high in RPM for a very extended period, you'd spin all the bearings out of the crank. And it ended up, he had a 55 that ran probably low 11s, maybe once in a while a high 10 with 2 4 barrels and a straight axle and all that stuff at that time. I ended up, the red 55 I had, a guy told me, he says, I have a fiberglass deck lid for you. And he says, I got it from somebody in Tucson, and they have a fiberglass front end. And I said, man. So I went and looked at it, and was looking, and his car was called Half Breed, and it had a big war bonnet on the deck lid that was painted. It was all candy apple and all that, and metal flake. And I laughed because that was the deck lid that I had on my red 55.
Oh, wow.
So I mean, there was some old history on the car that nobody knew about.
That's awesome. Smokey's still alive and kicking and doing he's working out of the industry now, but we get to see him at the Arizona Drag Racing reunion, and it's always good to see him. And I'm glad you brought his name up. Anybody else that was along the way that
I've got to meet some really neat people. The people that went through Dynamic Machine at that time, when you look at some of the Johnny West, Jimmy West, Dave Settles, Larry Meyer, Eddie Clough, Bones, Ishenball. I mean, the people that went through that shop were tremendous. And I mean, the knowledge that went through there. So just going down there and hanging around, you got to meet some of those people. And we used to go to Texas and meet up with Meyer and Clough and Settles and drive to Indy when we'd go back to Indy. And they're just absolutely neat people. And their knowledge is, Larry Meyer went on to crew chief for a lot of cars. Settles drove a tremendous amount of cars. Johnny West is still doing this stuff to this day, extremely sharp, extremely smart. Barry Norman, I used to talk to Barry a lot when he was doing his deal. In the car that you have, I believe is his old car, isn't it?
Yes.
And I mean, very neat stuff.
It was definitely, that car's trick. I mean, we bought the car because it's just unique, You know, it's not, is it, you know, for the class we want to run, maybe a little bit short, but it's got so many touches between what he did, Johnny West's influence on it, you know, all these people. But the dynamic machine brain trust, they train so many people in the way that
JT Stewart and Chauvin Evans. I mean,
Yeah.
they were way ahead of
the
themselves.
story about if you want to, you're going to buy a part, they'd rather you make it there,
Yep.
learn how to machine it, learn how to do it, and all that became a lot of think tank. A lot of innovation came out of that, and it was like, you know, it's great Arizona memory, you know, and what they did helped a lot of other people, just like what you've done over your life. I know you're an aw shucks guy, but you really are. You've influenced a lot of people. You've fought for people that needed a little push. You've always been fair, and that's something you should be very proud of. And the person I know, most of all, you know, this is all the stuff that makes you an Arizona drag racing legend. You know, you lived it, you've been a part of it, and the history that you shared with us is fantastic.
One of the things I like that when they first came up with the super class, the super gas, super street, and all that stuff, one of the things John came to me and says, what do you think of this super gas deal? Because I was building my 55 at the time to do that. And I said, you know, I thought it would really be neat. And one of the things I believe on that deal was talking John into sponsoring that somewhat. And John sponsored that stuff very well. He paid better. You would win more winning a state championship here than you would winning a national championship, just about, except for the get into race free card. He paid more money cash out to the people that won actually that stuff like that. And one of the other things I did that was pretty neat is Bruce Williams and I were very good friends, or are still good friends. And he wanted to build, we were talking about doing a Super E car, which was a 790 car at the time. And we always thought you could build a motor, a single 4-barrel deal, and go out and run 790s. I think you could do it fairly easy. So we came up, Bruce had his car, and we came up with a motor combination. We went out and put it together. It was a 540 with a single 4-barrel, and it would go out and run 760s at 175 mile an hour. And it didn't take a rocket science to do it, and it didn't take a boatload of money to do it. It was something that was, it took money, but it was fairly cheap at that time. I don't think anything is cheap racing anymore.
Everybody wants to overdo it now, unfortunately. You know,
It's just crazy.
They buy a 6-second engine to run 890s. You know, it's unbelievable, but that's the progress.
Do you know where the throttle stops came from originally? What first started them? Jegs bought a mountain motor UDRA Pro Stock car, Cutlass, had a power glide in it. Went to Indy, wanted to run a race, couldn't run Pro Stock with it. This is back when they were running the Cutlasses, so he put it in super gas. And he was trying to run a deal where he could throttle back. It was a car that would run 7s, probably high 7s or low 8s, and he wanted to run super gas. And he went to Indy, and the first year he ran it at Indy, the first race he ran, he ended up winning it. But he got very lucky because he was coming 30, 40 mile an hour on people on the other end, and they didn't know what to do with him. Some of the really good races he ran knew he cut good lights, and when you're coming up from behind him, his advantage was he could see what they were doing. They couldn't see really, nobody was used to somebody coming that far back on them. And that's where it really started. And it's really led to all that stuff.
That car is, I believe, for a long time, as far as I remember, because I have the opportunity in my profession to travel a lot, and I've been to JEG several times. That was in their showroom of their big warehouse for a long time. That was a memorable car, and that was a winning car.
Yes.
That's interesting. You know, Steve, you thought this was going to be tough, and it hasn't been tough because you've got such a great story, and you've shared it with so many people, and hopefully people get something out of it. You're alive and kicking. You look like your health is good, and we wish you many more years of great health and just being the person that you are, and your passion, your love. Thank you so much for being here today, and congratulations, because you are truly an Arizona drag racing legend.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.